are so happy to be hosting Product Hive here. We have loved to be a part of this community for such a long time. So we're grateful for everybody who's showed up for it. And I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
You forgot what?
Forgot your name.
Oh, you can say my lord. That's fine.
My lord.
Rogie King.
Rogie King here. So, and thanks to Ben for organizing these meetups. So if you're a student, feel free to talk to the person next to you or somebody not next to you. So, okay.
And a couple other things. Yeah, just welcome to the event. This product event. There, obviously, you guys all signed up for meetup, so you can see the future events that are coming up. There's, if you guys are wanting to do a workshop, hands-on workshop, there's a front conference workshop coming up in a few weeks. Awesome, thank you. And then I wanted to get some time here to talk about the Salt Lake Design Week, the design event with the whole week, and talk about the future events that they have. I don't know if the mic's on.
Okay, full the screen, it's fine. Okay, I'm Jordan, I'm with Salt Lake Design Week. There's a lot of awesome stuff happening this week. Thank you so much, Product Hive and Ben. Rogie, how do you say it?
Rogie?
Rogie?
Yep.
So sorry. Rogie, thank you so much for coming. We're so excited for this event. Nice to have an event. Another super series. Right there south, over that one. If you go north, we have a snowboard design challenge at the so it should be a pretty fun night. We also have, I think there's like an after party at the closest one. It's like a dinner party. So stick around. We're super excited and we hope to see you guys at everyone's event. If you need to find them, we're on Instagram at SL Design Week and we're looking forward to it. So thank you again for coming and thank you, Product Hive, and thank you.
Hey everybody, thanks for showing up. I haven't done a lot of things like this. I think the first one I did was when I first moved here from Montana. This was about 4 years ago, and I did a little small Figma workshop. I wasn't even working for Figma at the time. And since then, now I work for Figma as a designer advocate. And this is my first like post-pandemic, like sort of in-person thing. And I love this so much. So I just want to let you know too, I run on applause or oohs and ahs or any of that. Thank you. Thank you. Basically, I'm a homeschooled big nerd. I fell in love with design tools, design technology. I was in Figma's first beta, and I love the tools. But first, when I saw it, I thought, well, nobody can do design in a browser. This is bullshit. But then I started realizing the power and what it was built on, and it's built on like WebGL and all these like things that I didn't know anything about, but it was like fast and performant. And I started nerding out on it, and I started sharing stuff on Twitter and like, oh, this is so cool how they do the vector stuff. And soon enough, Figma started realizing that I loved them a lot. And then that was able to get me into being able to work at Figma. I've been involved a lot in Figma's community related stuff. So Config, if you've ever seen, has anyone seen, like, did you go to Config? Did you watch it? So Config is ran by our director, Azra, one of my close friends at Figma, but I had a big part in that. Our community team, our designer advocates all have a very big part in that conference. We love it. And I love that we're doing this a little bit smaller. This feels more intimate and not as big production. So I'm excited about this today. All right. So first of all, this is 20 things I wish I knew about Figma. I think 20 is an arbitrary number. With ADHD, that's sort of how everything is for me. It's pretty arbitrary. It's probably going to be a lot more than 20 things. I know you have your computers out, but buckle on. I don't think that you're going to be able to keep up. I'm just going to let you know. But I mean, if you want to try, I challenge you, definitely. The idea with this here is that it's less of a workshop and more of a demo, hands-on demo, like I like to do. And it's really to just kind of open your mind and kind of give you the starters of thought going, wait, I could do that? I didn't know. And then, of course, there's always documentation and ways that you can research this later. Anyways, a little bit about me. This is me. I wear a hat all the time. Also, in my little avatar here, I'm at Rogie on Twitter. So if you have any questions later and you want to be on the dumpster fire that is Twitter, then you can absolutely like reply to me and just say like, hey, do you have any more information about like this technique? I was amazing. Designer Advocate is a bit of a unique function at Figma where really our job is to listen to you. We're designers advocate. We're advocating for you. And our job is to listen to you and say, hey, where are your pain points? How can we make this tool better? Like what's like difficult? Like, and it's amazing how much feedback we get back from that, from companies and from just regular people that are working, independent contractors or whatever. These people are able to give us great advice, and honestly, it's the community that really powers how good Figma is. And I still think Figma's a pretty cool. All right. I live in Murray, Utah, this is why it's so cool for me, is because this is local and this is something that I love to do, is like mingle with those local people. Just to let you know that this is more of an advanced Figma demo. It's not really on basics. We're not going to cover things like auto layout and constraints or like making your first component and all this. It's going to go a little bit above that. There's lots of great material out there. We will be using auto layout and constraints throughout this. We'll be using components. We'll be using interactive components. We'll be using all sorts of stuff, variants. I mean, you name it, variables. Yeah. So another thing, I know there's been a lot of dialogue out there on naming layers. If you have an aversion to unnamed layers, please gird your loins and prepare to be offended, because you will see a lot of unnamed layers. Okay, just putting that out there for you. All right, and with that, we're going to do my favorite thing, which is to not be in a presentation and to really like show workflows. I hope you all can see this. I'm hoping that maybe I could resize this UI a little bit. It feels like, yeah, I'd like it to be a little bit bigger. So maybe that helps a little bit. I wonder if we turned off some lights in here. Can we test that just to see how bright this can be in the comparison? They will work on it. Okay. All right, let's see. I got to see what time it is. All right. Okay, so at any point in time, I'll try to take a pause, but I get really hyper, so I might not be able to. But we're going to jump in with some basics. I know we said we weren't going to do much, but I'll just show some basic things. All right, first thing we're going to talk about is just like general image cropping. When you come into Figma, you might resize your image and do this kind of a thing with it. And maybe you want that plant to be in the center, and you're like, what the heck is happening here? A quick, easy tip is just to hold Command and then to resize like this. This is basically a quick window in the claps. Thank you, Seth. Thank you. It's just a quick window into cropping is holding this command. Now, if you ever want to get more advanced with this, if you hold Option and double click, this is a quick sort of portal into this crop window in the fill area. Now, I hate doing that because when I go there, I have to click here, then I have to go drop this from fill to crop, and that's a lot of steps for me, and I don't like that. So I'm going to hold Option and double click, and I can actually pan this now within the frame or the rectangle that it's in, and then I can actually make this thing bigger here. Quick tip on cropping, if you're like, man, that was really lackluster, don't worry, it'll get better. All right. So masking, I don't know how many of you use masking. I know we've had some frustrations about it, but let's just talk about it really quick. There's a couple of different ways that you can mask objects. So let's say we have this blobby shape here, and we just want to mask off this here. You might think that if you hold Shift and select two objects there, I'm actually going to change this. Hold on. Putting the wings on as we fly. All right, here we go. You might think that if you actually select the two objects here and then hit this mask tool, that things would work, but we just got a black blob and that's no fun. And that's because Figma says, oh, the object behind is the actual masking layer. So if I actually just scoot that behind, you can see my commands on the screen. I'm scooting that behind, but still selecting it and then masking. We can see here that now we can mask. So that's basic, right? This is the basic idea of just masking using outlines. Now, we have another concept here, which is masking using alpha values. Now, what I'm going to do is unmask the object below. I already had it prepped and set up here. I'm going to go, oops. All right. All right. And so we have this rectangle. It's a gradient rectangle. And what we have actually underneath it is like a PNG image. It's basically got some transparency to it. And we can actually use images with transparency to mask. So what I'm going to do is actually drop that behind, because that's how masks work, and then click on the mask on that layer. And now you can see that gradient shining through, which is super fun. And you can do super fun things with that, like maybe it's a GIF image. So I'm actually going to pull up this GIF image, load it in the sidebar here, and we can see this super fun one, but maybe we want to just like overlay that with a color. And because it has some transparency to it, we can actually do the same thing. I'm not going to step you through the masking because you're adults and you're super smart. So here we go. We now have a fully playing GIF with a mask. Now, let's get even more fun. We actually released this earlier this year. It's called a luminance mask. And a luminance mask is basically, it takes the brightness levels in an image or a gradient or something like that. And so if you would imagine like white is super bright and then black is super dark, and it'll actually use those values to create your mask. So coming here, I'm actually going to unmask this so you can see. It's got this funky little stripe. It's like got a lot of values of black and white in it. And we're going to use this as our mask. So the key thing here is we're going to drop it behind. We're going to mask it and make sure that you drop it down to luminance mask, because this would be the default look, which is super rad. But if I drop it down to luminance, you can see that it's using those blacks and those whites to create that mask. One step further, because why not, is what if we actually had like a video? So I'm going to take this, I'm going to unmask it so you can see it. Now it just looks kind of like that object before, but we can actually see that this is very similar. It's a video playing. And we can do the same exact thing with videos. I'm just going to drop it behind. We're going to mask. Now remember, like we can't play this right here because GIFs and videos will play in a prototype mode. Now, if you've used Figma for a while, you're probably used to just hitting play like this, and it'll go into another tab. And that's no fun because you just kind of want to test it here. So the new cool way that all the kids are doing is this preview way. So this is a shift space. You'll see definitely as you're exploring the Figma UI, take note of any time you can see little keyboard shortcuts here. And I'm going to use that keyboard shortcut. I'm going to select this frame, shift space, and now we can see this. Okay, that was only okay. That was only okay. It's going to get a lot better. All right. Just a few quick tips for vectors. I'm not going to go too deep into vectors. There's a lot there, and there's a lot of other tools that do vectors great. But a couple of things that have always been like, man, I wish I knew that about Figma is like joining. So you've got this funky blob. Apparently, we're making lots of blobs today. And your normal sort of like probably impulse would be like, well, I'm going to connect this to this, right? But what if you want to just do that automatically? So what I'm going to do is select the two objects, and I'm going to use Command J. And Command J is just a join command. It'll just join those together. But it gets even better than that. Because what if I actually am making a blob? I don't just want a straight line. So I'm going to double click to go into this vector object. And I'm going to hold Command, Shift, and J together. And look, it's like a smooth join. Smooth joins those things together. Another one that's like a super, super helpful one is, and when you're getting really frustrated, when you're making your sweet icons and your drawings, you come in, you're like, I don't want this point here. And you hit delete. And then you're like, where the hell did everything go? I just wanted to, like, I still want that shape. Delete and heal, you'll basically hold shift. And just remember that shift, if you're ever experimenting and just like hitting delete or whatever, like try those modifier keys. Just see what it does. So if I hold shift and I hit delete, you see that it's actually trying to still keep the curve, and it's called delete and heal. So it'll actually like keep the curve as best you can without destroying the object. Imagine if you're drawing a house icon or something like that. It's actually really great. If you had too many of those points on there, you could actually just like delete and heal and remove it without destroying the house shape. Man, you're really taking that clapping thing to heart. Thank you. Okay, another one that I never knew about that I'm like, man, I wish I knew this, is that nodes in Figma, like vector nodes, they actually have their own individual properties. So if I come here, you may you may have like sort of ventured into the wilds of the advanced stroke panel, but you'll see there's this funky thing called join. And this is basically describing how we might join when you actually have a point that comes together or a curve like this, how it might behave. Now, right now we're on this like sharp one. It's called a miter, where we can actually use a bevel or a round on these. And so the coolest part about it is that I'm only applying it to this one side. So I can actually come here. And the other thing that's a great tip is I can actually use this and select this one and only apply a rounded radius to just one of those nodes. I think a lot of us just think, oh, I'm going to select the object and just add the border radius here and do it that way, where you can actually apply them to individual nodes, which is actually super great. All right, we're going to blaze through these because we have a lot more to go. Another thing I love about vectors in Figma is that you actually have Boolean operations. We're going to adapt a little bit here. We're going to move on past these last two tips. Oh, I'm so sorry. But I want to get to the better stuff. All right. We will talk a little bit about constraints and auto layout, only because there's specifically a couple of features that are exciting that not a lot of people know about. The first one is this idea of using a grid and constraints. But in Figma, it's only a specific kind of grid that you can use. Now, let's go ahead and kind of set up a situation here like we would. Let's pretend this design is beautiful. And we've got a grid on here. Now, keep in mind, it has to be this type of a grid, like an 8-column stretch grid, not just any old grid. But the trick here is normally when we have these objects on the screen here and we have no grid, I'm just going to get rid of the grid altogether. We're going to resize this whole frame, and we notice that there's a few problems. One, these rectangles aren't really moving. And you're kind of like, well, how do I make this more of a fluid layout? So I can actually take each one of these, and if you know a bit about constraints, you'll know that like if you set left and right on them, it'll actually kind of pin the edges of these objects. So now if I go and resize this, it's really sad and ugly, and it's not doing what I want to do either. I really want to kind of honor these gaps in between according to a grid. Another little slight tip for you here, if you ever want to like copy fills or grids or things like that, it's a little bit of a small hit target, but if I click over here to the left, I can actually copy it. And I'm going to copy that grid. I'm going to come over here and add that grid here. I'm actually going to back up just a bit there. And if I come back in and I set each one of these now with this stretch column grid to left and right, lo and behold, it'll actually honor the grid and it'll keep the gaps in between the grid as well. And you can do this with multiple nested grids. So with this frame here, I've got an additional grid of a 4-column grid here. And this is why the objects on top are actually honoring this 3-column grid here, or 3 columns that I put together, and 4 here. So you can mix and match these things. You can use constraints within a frame using a grid to do that. Now you can obviously grow that up a little bit, do something like this sweet looking design. I definitely localized it, go pretty bird, and I'm going to resize this grid here. Now I'm actually using components. I'm getting a little bit flexy with this, showing off my cool styles. But you can see now that as I resize this grid, the gutters and everything are exactly right, and they're resizing perfectly. I use this so much. I use this in combination with auto layout and using spacing inside of auto layout. So for instance, I'm using that grid to set the actual left and right values of this main frame, but here I'm actually using auto layout inside of it and setting a gap in between it. Another one, we'll just blaze through these really quick. Let's say you've got some avatars and you want to create a face pile. You got a bunch of these components put in here and you add auto layout to it. Now, for the longest time, we had a ton of people that would shout out and say, we need negative spacing. We want to be able to like overlap those things. So now we have it. You can actually go into negative spacing and overlap these things. Now, one thing that I always love to share about like working with the design panel is that anytime you see an icon in the design panel, you can actually scrub that, which means you can drag it. But one thing that a lot of people don't know is that what if you don't have an icon there? What if you don't want to drag there? At any point in time, you can hold Option, and you can actually scrub over the actual value here. So you can actually scrub anywhere. I can scrub on this. I can scrub on this just by holding Option. Notice that that drag cursor is not available. It's only available over the icon. But as soon as I hold Option here, I now have it available. And another great thing that nobody really knows is that you can actually scrub and wrap around. So I can actually scrub, and if I keep dragging my mouse, it'll just keep wrapping around over and over. I don't know why you would use that, but good luck with it. All right, we'll keep this one pretty simple and fast too. Let's say you've got a button. Everybody's made one of these, the ugliest button you've ever seen in your life. Here it is. I made this morning. So thank you, thank you. All right, and it's set up with auto layout. That should be pretty easy. If I want to type in some text here, oops, it's not hugging, so I'm going to say hug. Great. And you can see here that I can put some content into this. But recently at Config, we announced a couple of really cool things. And there's specifically 3 things. They're min width, max width, and truncation. And let's say we've got this button here. And I'm just going to say like some like text you might say. And let's say you're like changing this in your design, and all of a sudden you get here, that looks really, really ugly. And you're probably thinking like, give me a min width here. Like, I know that this button might be like minimum width of 100 pixels. So all we can do here is go in, add a minimum width, and type in what we think that minimum width should be, not 1,000. We'll do 100. Oh God, back up. All right, we'll add our minimum width of 100. And if we now expand this and contract it, we'll see that it actually stops. It'll actually stop me from doing that. So I'll get that min width here. We can also do a max width in the same way. For whatever reason, you may want to do this thing. We'll actually have a better demo later on this. But now as I resize, we'll actually see that I hit my min width and my max width, and that's all I can do. Now, the other great thing is text truncation. So we all know that like user-generated content in user interfaces is never going to behave the way that we want to. Somebody's going to have some novel that they've shoved into a title or something like that. So let's say we want to set truncation rules. I can actually come in and say I want to truncate the text here under the type settings panel. And then if things get super long, and we hit that max width, we can actually set, I think we have this set to hug. We'll need to set this to fill. And now we can see that we can actually have truncation. The truncation gets even better too, because let's say you want to put this on a card or something with like a title and a description, and you want that description to be like 2 lines. You can actually say a maximum amount of lines here as well for text truncation. So no matter how much text I put into this object, it's always going to hit that 2 lines. It's going to cap out, and then it's going to truncate. All right, let's talk about baseline alignment. Yeah, all right, Figma. All right. And I'm going to have to hide this annoying panel. Okay. Now, we probably all ran into this kind of, we're talking a little bit about like typography rules for design here. But let's just say we think we're pretty cool and we add auto layout to this like header row where you've got like favorites and then like maybe there's a view more on the other side. And you're trying to think like, well, what can I do here? And I'm going to turn on my grid because I set a little grid here for a grid line. This is the baseline of the text. And we notice that the view more button is actually not on the baseline. And so I might mess around with this and be like, oh, cool, I'll just like align it bottom. Oh, that doesn't work. Well, I'll align it top. Like nothing's working for me here. The great thing about this is that I can actually go into the auto layout ellipsis menu here and just say align text baseline. And now we can have that perfect, like now your designer friends will definitely think you're cool and you can keep your job, hopefully. And we've got that aligning to the baseline as opposed to just aligning to like the geometric centers. So that's always like a really great little tip. Now we're going to get crazier. Let's see time. I know I've got to go fast. All right. Here's another thing that we launched, I believe, beginning of this year, which is, has anybody used absolute position within auto layout yet? Raise that, show of hands. All right, cool. So some people will learn something and some other people need to teach me more today. All right. So we've got this like fun, funky window title. And if you remember back in Windows, this title was always centered in the window. And then you have the controls kind of hanging off to the right. But we've set this up with auto layout. And because these are here, notice if I drag them out, the title is centered. But because they're actually over there, it's actually pushing it over. And so we can actually see this a little bit more exaggerated when I come here. Actually, let me make sure I didn't have this. Yeah. Yeah, you can see it a little bit more exaggerated here. And you might think to yourself, well, maybe I'll just measure. This is 52 pixels wide. Okay, I'm gonna like go in and add 52. I'm gonna do some math in here, 2 plus 52. And like, oh, I did it on the wrong side. So now I'm gonna have to open this. Okay, left side, 2 plus 52. And you might do that to get that centered feel. On these short windows, it doesn't work really well. But when I actually expand out, this is kind of the effect that you want. Well, you don't need to do that anymore. You can actually just go to these objects here and say, they need to be absolutely positioned. It's a funky little icon and it's way up here in the frame. But if you click that, notice that everything is fixed because the title is perfectly centered with a longer window. That's sort of the effect they're going for. And we notice one more problem is that this still is not actually where it needs to be. It needs to be anchored on the right. And this is where we're going to use constraints. If I click on this set of controls and I set the constraints to right and center if I'd like, constraints work still in the same way that you'd expect them to. Now we have exactly what we'd like here. And the same thing, similarly, we've got this. Oh, well, fitting. We actually did eat pizza. Let's say we've got eat pizza now, and we want this icon to kind of be fun and funky and hang off of the button. We could do the same thing here. Let's just add absolute position here. That'll actually take it out of the flow of the auto layout. And now I can nudge it around. Maybe I want it to hang off the button like this. And remember, set those constraints. When this thing resizes, I want it to be pinned to the right and the top. Now, when I add text here, you'll see that that absolute position is working within that auto layout. All right, more auto layout stuff. Right, thank you. All right, now we have this really beautiful interface. I believe that a child drew these and then somebody else, not me, drew these. Let's say we want to work on this mobile mockup, but we want it to be responsive. And so this looks like maybe this is, I don't know, it's taking up a lot of vertical screen real estate. Maybe we don't like this as much. And so I'm thinking about just trying to think about it a few ways. Maybe this could go into a column. And let me just kind of stretch this window a bit. Well, let's see, this is set to auto layout. And one way you might handle this is just to use auto layout wrapping. So I'm just going to click wrap. And I don't know, that's pretty cool. All right, that kind of works. And like, what if I want this to now go to like a full desktop size? So I'm going to zoom in here. And I'm going to pull it out. That's not bad. That's maybe like tablet size. Let's go a little bit bigger. And now I'm like, I don't know. I don't want it all crushed in the middle there. I actually want to give them a little bit of breathing room. And so let's go back a little bit and come back to our original state and go, well, maybe we'll just use the fill container setting. So here's a cool trick. You're on a frame, slam enter, and it'll select all the children. Hit shift enter. You'll go back to the top frame. I'm going to hit enter. And I'm going to select all the child objects. And I'm going to say, instead of hug, I want them to be filled. And now I think I'm super smart. So I'm going to hit wrap here. And this is like, it's a little like maybe, oh, okay, that's good. That's not bad. But once I start getting, okay, now I have more problems. Like, I don't want them smashing up on top of each other. So what I'm going to do is do the same trick. Select the frame, hit enter, and this is where min width comes in. Let me add a min width, and I'm going to add 148 to this. And now we can see that no matter what, even if they're on fill, they're going to fill as they can. And that means maybe they're going to scrunch when they get smaller, but they'll stop at that min width setting. And now once I expand this frame, you can see that it's got more breathing room. Maybe I'd like to actually add some additional padding on the left and right. I can do that here, add in a few more here. I've got that pad. Actually, that's not where I meant to do it. Let's do it here. And we'll talk about variables in a second, but that's using a variable. And now it's all working beautifully. It's working, it's hitting those min widths, and we can see that we can actually duplicate these objects just to stress test this UI. How's this all working? Okay, this is wonderful. Now I can actually test it and maybe drag this. So I'm going to make this a bit smaller. I'm going to back up just so that I can make it a little smaller here. And now we can, of course, take this and bring it into this. I'm going to just grab this and put it in here. Here's my arrow keys, bring it up. Now, of course, I can test this whole UI like this. And I really, really advise, after doing so much auto layout, work from the inside and out. So work with a smaller component, work with a smaller like atom, and get that all working in the way that you want to, then bring it into a larger composition and then test that too. So we're all good now. That's fun. That's auto layout wrapping, min and max, some more of that. All right. All right. I know that I have so much more, so I'm gonna actually skip over a few of these. The ones that are not exciting to me, I'm gonna skip over them because I want to make sure I get you to the good stuff. Now, does anybody know about icons, color overrides, and have you ever done duotone icons with color overrides? That was a lot. Okay. All right. Yep. So maybe you have. Okay. The key thing to know with this is that there's a scenario that you might run into. Let's say we have a button, it has an icon in it, and that icon originally is, say, black. But in the actual buttons that you're building for your library, you're going to override those colors and they're going to be white. And this is all great, right? Until you go to swap them out. And maybe you've ran into something like this and you're like, my life sucks. This is not a great thing. And then you got to go and like recolor it. The reason for this is because when Figma does a swap from one component to another, it just matches layer names within that component. And so when it looks at the layer names, if they match, it'll go ahead and transfer over those styles. So let's back up really quick and let's look at the problem space here. I'm going to pull this way up. All right, in icon search, you'll see that there's a shape. That's the name of the shape layer. And there's an accent layer. All right, that's great. But when we look at this one here, icon comment, we see that they're named differently. They're named bubble and layer, which is not the same name. So Figma doesn't know to apply the overrides to that layer. So all we simply need to do here is just, and this is, I promise, the only time I'm going to name layers. After that, we're going buck wild. All right. So I'm going to name this shape and accent. Now I've named this in this component. When I come here and I change this out now to the comment, if it works, I need raucous applause. It works. All right. So just remember that with really not just icon components, but really anything that you're going to want to, if you're going to swap out the components and you want those overrides to transfer over text layers, vector layers, whatever, and you want those colors to come with it or the text copy to come with it, then make sure that the layer names are the same. So you're going from a variant of one component to another, but you want the titles to come over, the colors to come over with that swap, do that. You can also use it to your advantage in the other way. If you don't want overrides to happen, then just don't name the layers the same. All right, so I'm a front-end developer as well. And in front-end development, they've come up with something called slots. And it's actually really great. You define this component and you basically say, hey, it's like a modal dialog, or in this case, like a drop-down, and you say, I don't know what's going to be in this component. There's some content of some kind. And that's dynamic. You want to pass it through. Well, components in Figma don't quite work that way. And I really wish they do. We've talked to our team a lot about it, and I think we'll probably be working on something. But for instance, let's say I've got this new content here. And this is my drop down that I've got from my design system here. And if we go over here, try not to give you whiplash, but we've got this drop down here and it's got all this stuff in it. And the problem is, if I want to actually take this content and put it into here, I can't, because that's how Figma components work. You can't really affect the structure of an instance. So probably you've done this. I know it feels a little bit dirty, but I've done it too. So you come in here and you just go, I'm going to detach this. I know, it's okay. I feel your pain. And then you come in here and you go like, I'm going to paste or replace, great new command, Command Shift R, paste or replace. And this is awesome, right? You're like, oh, I feel like a king. But all of a sudden your design system designer like changes that border radius to something very huge and childish. And then you've got this situation here where like, oh shit, like this didn't update. So this is where slots come in. So I'm going to back up really quick. And it's not the most convenient. It's a little bit of a hack. I think I even call it a hack. But what we're going to do here is we're actually just going to take some default content that we want in here. It's going to be a bunch of list items, whatever. I'm going to copy this. And instead of just simply having a frame here, that's just an auto layout frame here, I'm going to paste that in. And I'm going to use Command Shift R, paste to replace, and you'll notice the little diamond. That means it's a component instance. And now what happens is we actually have this content here as an instance. And what can we do with instances? We can swap stuff out in them like we did with the icons. Now, here's the dirty part. I'm going to come into this content and I'm going to make a local component. If you don't ever want to publish it, you could put a little dot in front of it. It's a quick, easy hack to say this is a private component. And I'm going to take this. I'm going to now come in to my drop-down content and I'm going to replace it with new content. Now, it's effectively a slot. You're shoving new content in there without detaching it. It's a little dirty, but I use it, I use it. So, component properties. Okay, can I get a show of hands? How many people think they've I know component properties? Okay, so we'll definitely demo this. We didn't have a lot. Okay. In the days of yore, when Figma first came out with components, you'd have to do a lot of silly things when you wanted to edit things. So I'm going to take this button, create a component for it, and I've realized I want to edit this text. And if you've ever felt this pain, you have to double click into it and get way into the icon or whatever. And maybe there's a very common set of things that you'd like to do with this button. One is you probably want to have an icon turned off or on. The other is maybe you want to be able to just edit the text of the button. And another one is you might want to change that icon. So there's a limited set of things that you might want to do, and you want to make this really easy for anybody using your components. So I'm going to take this button and I'm going to add a few things to it. The first thing I'm going to do, and keep in mind, I'm doing this on the master component, not the instance over here. I'm going to go into this icon layer and I'm going to use this little thing here. I don't even know what it looks like, a lightsaber or something. It's cool though. And we're going to create an instance swap property on that icon. And this is telling this button component that, hey, we want to create something here that enables the user to be able to switch out this icon. So I'm going to do this really quick. I'm going to call it icon. I'm going to do the same thing with the text. And I'm going to come down to the actual text property, do the same thing here. I'm going to call this label. You can even put in my default value of button label. And then I'm going to come back into this icon because I want to tell this component that, hey, icons can be turned off or on. You may not need one. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to go to the layer and do this on the layer. The second you click on the little lightsaber icon, it's going to tell that layer this is a Boolean property. And a Boolean property tells things to switch off or on. So I'm just going to call this show icon. Now, nothing has really changed, but when we click the component instance, this is going to be the thing that you use when you're making your mockups. We have 3 magical properties that have exposed themselves. So one is label, which means now I don't have to click 3,000 times to get into that. I can just type in click me and it'll update. So I can just add that text over there. The other thing is I can actually say show icon or hide icon, and it just turns off and on. Now, one thing's annoying about this to me is I kind of hierarchically want the icon property to be under the show icon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to the main component, and I'm actually just going to do a little drag and drop action here and just move that down. So now when I click this, you can see when I show icon, it turns off and on, and it exposes this little icon field. Now, a few last tips about this. I got this from a friend at Config. I'm going to copy this little arrow thing. I kind of wish that Figma would do this naturally and natively, but we're going to go ahead and say this icon. We're going to change this. I'm going to double click it, and I'm just going to copy in that little glyph there. So when I use the component now, it kind of looks cool, right? And it tells me the hierarchy. I've got show icon, and then I got a little arrow that moves over there. So all good stuff. You can, of course, go further with these, but this is kind of a basic primer to component properties and how you can use those. Okay, if anybody wants to know about the space between hack, it's super fun. I'm going to show it really quick, but I'm not going to walk through the layers so we can move on to something new. But remember how we talked about components, and we talked about we create this cool slider component. And now I create an instance of it, and you're probably now I want to move that. And you've probably seen those slider components where there's 800 different variations of them, so that they can be 10%, 20%. We've all seen them. Well, this is not the most intuitive. I'm going to call it a hack because it is a hack, but you'll notice what I've done in this is I've actually got a couple of frames in here that say don't delete. And this actually uses the space between. And strangely enough, we can trick Figma and be like, haha, but we can still move this thing. So now when I use the space between here, I can do this. It is a bit of a hack. It's not intuitive. This isn't what I suggest in production design or whatever, but I like messing with these things because I like to Figma. Aha, I can still do it. Anyway, all right, we're going to move on. We're going to get crazier. We are going to go to interactive components. How's everybody doing? Thank you. I know it's after lunch. You're probably getting nappy. I am too. I am too. All right, we're going to do a basic. Okay, show of hands. I just kind of want to make sure I'm showing you things that like you could learn from. Show of hands. Who knows a bit about interactive components? Okay, so you know quite a bit. All right, so we're not going to talk about setting up your initial interactive components. We'll just jump into the goods and show off what you can do. The cool thing about interactive components is basically you take variations of a component. In this case, it's a single component, right? It's just a singular component, and you can see this magical little diamond icon, and it'll say add variant. That's basically how you create variations of something. So that's how we've done this here. In this case, we've added a few variations of this, and we've actually named them because we're really smart. And so we named them state disabled, or maybe off would be better. And then state transitioning, because I want this to be a really smooth animation. And then we've got this like final state enabled. Remember what I said about icon overrides. When we're doing these animations between things, we also want the layer names to be the same, because Figma will know how to smart animate between the different frames as long as the layers are the same. And if I come into the layers, I can see that this is beautifully named frame, perfect, and that this one is also beautifully named frame, great. So these will all animate together. All right, so what I'm going to do here is just go to the prototyping tab. I've already got this set up so we can move through quickly. And you can see that I say on click, change this to the state of transitioning, and I'm using smart animate. So Figma is just going to go, I don't know, this and this, like we'll just figure it out for you and make the animation work. And we'll just choose ease in and out. I dare you to get in here and have fun, do spring. That'll really, really screw you up, but it's super fun. And then the next thing is we're going to basically say on click, go to this intermediate state, and then we're going to do something fun and fancy. We're going to say after delay, we're actually just going to go to the next one. So we kind of have this animation, and then it continues along. And we're actually saying after delay 1 millisecond. So we're basically just saying, just move to this. So we're creating like a state animation here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete these out and just use Option and drag one of these in. And I'm going to use my shift space to see, and now you can see this animation. We've got this cool toggle. This is like the basics of interactive components. Now we'll show off some more. You've probably seen something like this on Disney Plus. I assume because you're all in Utah, you like Disney. So basically I created a component here that's got the basic shape. And then I shoved that component into 4 different variants and just rotated each one. And I'm kind of doing a similar thing that we did last time, is I'm saying after delay, I'm basically just using this to step, and do all the rotations. And I'm just saying after delay 1 millisecond, smart animate. In this case, we're going to do linear because we want everything to smoothly go around in a circle in a linear fashion. So I'm actually doing this all throughout, and then I loop it back around. So when I come here, I can actually see I also do an after delay and come back here as well. Now, the cool thing, and the reason that I kind of created this as a component in and of itself, is because now we can do modifications to this whole thing and watch the thing update. We're going to do something that we haven't done quite yet. We can now see this. So I'm sure you're feeling the love. You're wanting to watch Moana or the new Loki, but now we can actually come and watch this inline preview. And this is what I love about this inline preview, is I can actually come in and make changes to this on the fly. So maybe we want this, whatever this blurry star looking thing is, maybe I want that to be a bit bigger. And so I'm actually going to, I'm going to do, this one is like the claw. I think I have to do command, option, shift, and resize. And oh God, What did I do? Nobody's ever done that. Okay. Yeah, I was doing a lot of things at once there, I know. I'm going to come back into this little thing, and what I want to do is find this one here. And if I hold Command, Option, Shift, and size, it'll actually resize from the center. It's a really difficult one to pull off, but your yoga instructor will thank you. But look at this. Like now I can actually make this thing bigger and like test it out. So like I'm actually watching live what's happening. And so I can still come in here as well. Maybe I actually want to add an effect and say, hey, I made it really big, but I want to blur this thing out even more. I'm going to blur it out even more. So you can actually get like these live previews of this. I can even like double it up and make it even more intense. So this is like really fun little playground where you can like use interactive components, test out loading animations that are a little bit more unique and fun, and test them on the fly. Okay, we're not going to go too much in the details on this one, but I'll just show you like, hey, I did this. This was fun. This was fun. It's basically two states of two different variations where I just actually moved the lines out a little bit, but I've created this like pulsing, animating like waypoint thing, and then I can actually move it around on the map, and I've got a fixed element on there. That's super cool. Just stuff you can do with interactive components, but we have lots more. So we're going into variables. All right, baby's first variable. All right, so when we want to create a variable, let's go ahead and see how we're going to do that. First thing we're going to do is maybe create, for this component, we want to create some variables for the background color, maybe the text, things like that. So if I click on the canvas, that's the key, you'll see local variables. So I'm going to start creating some of these. And I'm going to go to colors. And we're going to start creating variables. Now, we're not going to go too deep into this, but I'll just show you how easy it is. I'm going to create a variable, and I'm going to say it's a color. And we'll be really bad about our naming. We'll just call that BG for background. And maybe we've got a light and a dark. So I don't know what that dark's going to be yet, but I'm going to say it's that. And maybe we want to create some variables for this text here. So I'm actually going to do something a little smarter. I'm actually going to command click the text and come down to the fill color through the style panel and click plus, and actually it'll create a variable from here. So it'll pull that color value. So I'm just going to call this text prominent. Now I'm definitely not giving you best practices here. Best practices would probably be something in a whole other lecture about creating primitives and creating semantic variables. Our team has a lot of great stuff on that. But for now, we're just playing with variables. We'll just make it some variables. All right. So we're going to say text prominent here. And then on this one, this is like a subdued text or a secondary text. We'll do the same here. So we'll come in, we'll create another one. We're putting it into the collection colors, and we're going to say text secondary. I actually think I did not do, I did the bad thing, didn't I? Let me see. Yeah, I probably did it in the sizes collection. And I want to do it in this color collection for a reason. So I'll do text primary. I'm going to create that variable. All right, and you'll see that once I do that, it immediately binds to this variable. Now remember, I'm not going to go through it, but you can actually use these variables in your styles. So you don't have to get rid of styles. Variables can actually be referenced in styles, and that's great. But the key thing here is that we want to have this light and dark mode switch. I'll just make sure that these are set to the right ones. We've got text primary, and this is great. This is the component. Over here is the instance. And I think we've got a pretty good thing going on. Let's make sure that we have our fill set to the background variable. And this is the cool thing about variables. The very coolest thing is that I can come in, and on any frame or any layer, I can actually just change the context of the mode. Now, I created that dark mode before. So I'm going to come in here, change the context of the mode, and I'm going to change it to, did I do this right? Dark mode. That doesn't look that great. Okay. But the cool thing about this is those variables are bound, and this is actually pulling from those variables. So all I have to do is change them. Notice that my dark was wrong here. Like maybe I wanted my background to be a little darker here, like this. And maybe I wanted my primary text to be white. I just didn't set that. So we'll set that to white. And maybe we need to adjust this to have a little bit more prominence. But the great thing is now we're doing mode switching on the same exact component. And I think that's super cool. And I'll show off more as we move through this, but a little bit more about variables. There's also text variables, and those text variables can be used to do a lot of funky things. Language switching, we'll do a pretty quick demo on that. It's pretty cool, but you can also bind it to like actions. Let me see what we got for time. I think we're at 10 minutes. I think we're actually going to just show off what this does rather than demoing how to do it. Just show off. We've got this piece of art here, and we have all kinds of these text layers. Now, normally, if you wanted to, we're stacking all these styles and we're using a ton of different layers, but we've actually bound them to text variables, both of these. So if I go to my variables and I go to my text variables, in this case, I don't have two modes, just one, but you can see that I actually have comics. So I say, hi, Utah. Notice it's actually updating that, but it's actually updating probably 20 or 30 different layers to create this effect. Like if I'm actually coming into this effect and delete these out, you'll see what happens. And similarly, we can actually say the same thing here. We can do something like this if I could type and update that variable, and you'll see it updates here. Now, for this artistic case, maybe that's not really what you want to do, but let's just say you have a common CTA like click me or add to cart, and you wanted it to say add to cart across your entire design. This is exactly why you would create a text variable like that, is you would say, that's my CTA. It's add to cart. This is my login button. And remember the old like login, sign in wars? Like, what do you use, login or sign in? We don't know. But let's say all of a sudden your team says, oh, we did say login, but we want it to be sign in. You can actually update that in one place and it'll update across everywhere. So probably a more realistic example of how you might use that in the wild. All right. We're going to continue blazing through. We're not going to go through this. This is great. But the basic idea of this one, I can share more online or whatever, is that you can actually scope your variables, because not all your variables are going to apply to the same thing. So for instance, a border radius, you might have a border radius variable, but you don't want to apply that to an auto layout spacing. So that's the basic idea. You can scope your variables. I'll zoom in really quick just so you can see, but you can right click on your variables and then you can scope them and say, this is a border radius variable, so I only want this number to apply to this corner radius. I think this is the most important part of this demo, is really showing how it all works together. Because I think that if we just go, cool, man, like you got styles, like great, like how good is that? We already have styles. Why do we need variables? But I think this is really what we're trying to get at, is that, for instance, we could have a mock-up like this, and we could actually come in and change on the layer, the color to dark, and everything can update. And that's really great. But even better than that, maybe we want to change the entire page mode to dark, and then everything changes. This is super powerful. And now it's easy to compare all of your dark modes, light modes, and switch modes where you need to switch them. But that's not even my favorite part. My favorite part is actually sizing and localization. So for instance, what if we have like various responsive sizes of things? Well, we know kind of how to do some responsive design, but what if we want to like maybe on a desktop, like space things out a little bit more and give them a little bit more breathing room? We can actually use dimension variables to do that. So I'm going to come up here to my layer. Let's go here, go to the layer. Remember, always go to the layer, change the mode, and we have a collection called densities. And so we can go to compact, we can go to comfortable, and we can go to spacious. And those variables are actually controlling whether or not images show and everything. And it's super powerful. And so I think that's so exciting. And even more exciting is if you're trying to test localization. So if we're actually talking about different kinds of languages, we may have said click me, or in this case, continue to payment button down here. Well, that all works great, but in different languages, it actually might take up much more space. And as the designer, we want to see how that's going to behave. And so we can do the same thing here. We can actually go and say, hey, what platform is this going to be on? So this is a mobile layout, but we also have English, German, Japanese, and we can load in all these variables just to see how they all work. And I think that's awesome. Okay, we're at the choose your own adventure. I think we've got about 10 minutes. We can go back to variables. So I want to, two things we can do. We can go to prototyping, or we can go back to variables and just setting up more variables. What do we want to do? Variables, show of hands. Prototyping, show of hands. This is about the same. This is about the same. Okay. All right. We'll skip through a few of these. I think that a lot of these prototyping ones are, I'll just show one. I'll show one. And then we'll go back to variables a little bit and do some, I have a really fun one at the end that I've been planning for you all that I want to make sure I get to. Just some interesting things about prototyping using fixed and sticky positions. And a few things that like I never knew, and now I know that are like important to note. Let's say we've got this cocktail app, and we want to create a row component. And then each one of those row components you can see are right here. We've got all these different cocktail row components. We've overridden the images and the text. We can actually bake in scrollability into a component. So if I click on the component and go to prototype, I can actually say, hey, in this area, I want this to have a horizontal overflow. And what's great about that is then I don't actually have to think about that. No matter how I resize that thing, if it's on a tablet or if it's here, if it's on a website, it'll automatically bake it in to a horizontal overflow there. The other thing is, and you probably already know this because you're very smart, is that you can actually like vertically scroll these things as well. Very simple to do. And a quick primer on that is like, hey, like maybe we can come in and in this component, we can actually set this to overflow vertical. So we can actually do both at the same time. Another really fun thing that you can do is you can actually use fixed position. So I'm going to do my trick. Remember the one where I hit N?
And the first one is this idea of meaning operations. So when we go back to this, notice how we have those cards, right? And these little cards are fun, but they got these little notches out of the like the edges, and it's super cool. But my obsession is always like, how do I create something like that? And how do we still? So my first thought would be like, okay, cool. And then I'm gonna create a little ellipse. And then I'm gonna just take these and I'm gonna put them center them on the edge. Tell me how y'all would do really happen. And then I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna just classic selection. And now I feel like a god because I hate this and this. But now what? This is ready for a button. Let's go, let's resize it. And all of a sudden, my heart drops because this is horrible and it's all skewed and it's bad. Now this is the trick. So you can actually use these Boolean operations and you can use constraints together. And so this is my, this is always sort of one of my favorite things to share. So I can move a tremendous amount. But what I can do, I have to put this in a frame too. Remember, because constraints work within frames and frames only. So I'm gonna group this just because I'm gonna show you how to trick. And if I'm like, oh crap, I made a group, I want a frame, that's okay. Go up here, just switch it to a frame. That's that we don't pun. That was the best. Now we come into this subtraction Boolean operation, and I'm going to do my thing right hint. Left and right, top and bottom, because it's inside of that frame now. Let's say it's stuck to the edges of this, so it gets the size of the work. But unfortunately, it's not that simple. Now that we become 20s, and I need to tell this little ellipse up here in the upper left, just, I know it's a lot of work. That's okay. Do this when you're meditating or whatever. Put the music on. I'm going to say I want this to be at left and top. This one over here. I'm going to say I want this one to be at the right and top. And this is okay. I'm going to go to the right and the bottom. And last, this will be left. Now, I actually noticed a lot of people in the audience, so I'm moving it over. Yep. This is a Boolean operation. If I put an object behind it like that, that's C. So effectively, now you can use this frame as a mask for something and get more creative with your stuff. Now, that's where I want with this one. Now, I've got this border. It's the same thing. I'm not going to go through all the layers, but it's the same technique. The only difference is there's another trick. You can actually put in components inside of the Boolean operation, and it will just work. So if I go here, I open this up, you can actually see that I've got a reference. There's that little diagram. I've got a reference to that component. I also got some lines, but I'm doing all this in the same way. Left and right, bottom. I'm doing that bottom line. It hit the edges. And now when I do this border, same thing, right? We don't know if that's squish. Look at that. Look at that. I did the same thing. I composited it the same way. Look, it's got these funky edges like this. But look, same thing. It's not squishing. It's not getting a weird shape. Now, putting it all together, I take this main button and button. Your developers are going to hate you. Absolutely. But I encourage you. But we're going to take this border, we're going to do the same thing, but now we're going to use absolute position. Remember when I taught you that? Absolute position inside of auto layout. I'm going to use absolute position inside of auto layout. I'm going to pin the left and right. I'm going to pin the top and the bottom. I'm going to take the background. I'm going to do the same thing. Pin it all over the edges. Absolute position. But I want this to be auto layout. So if we take this over here, it is auto layout. And now, the whole thing is I can actually make people taller like this too. And so just this is like the culmination of my career. No. One little button. I really hope you send me the letters that your developer sends you. I'd be happy to support it. And as the last, this is a very similar method, like using the same idea. Like everything just works. But I've got that cool checkerboard, like kind of a thing. That's kind of overlaying with some auto layout position back on there. I don't know. I just kind of want the web to not be so boring, so that's my challenge to do. And I think that's all it's up.